not only were we able to demonstrate the reduction in bioburden, but we saw dramatic improvement in the patient experience scores. Literally, we are batting 1,000. So as a result of that, we're rolling out these new programs, and we're seeing that not only on the patient units, but we're seeing operating rooms. So the surgeons will communicate it to their patients, in pre-op, like, hey, this is something that the institution is doing. Or we're also beginning to see it in ASCs, where these ASCs, obviously that's the wave of the future, when it comes to surgical procedures, to be able to communicate to their patients, their customers, this is our commitment to ensuring that we're providing you an environment with a reduction in bacteria, virus, spore. This is kind of what we're doing, and it translates to higher scores. So kind of everybody wins. The patient wins, the organization wins, and then Surfacide wins.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this Vendor Spotlight, we are speaking with Gunner Lyslo, founder and CEO at Surfacide. And you may think that you've learned everything and heard everything that you need to know about UV light disinfection, but we're going to be discussing an innovative technology, one that's incredibly easy to use, and it's not something that's going to end up sitting in the closet. And Gunner's going to tell us why today, Melanie.
I love learning why things work. I love learning the why behind why we do what we do. And I really like it when we do some myth busting and break down what we've heard versus what the truth is. So I'm really looking forward to his explanation and his education for us today about UV-C disinfection.
All right, stay with us. We're going to be back very shortly with Gunner Lyslo.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Melanie and I are speaking with Gunner Lyslo, founder and CEO at Surfacide, and we're going to be educating everyone today around UV-C light disinfection. Gunner, welcome to the First Case podcast.
Hey, good morning, Justin. Good morning, Melanie. It's great to be with you folks today.
Gunner, why don't you talk a little bit about your background? I mean, how did you come to be such an expert on UV-C?
Well, expert may be a slight stretch there, Justin, but I've been involved in the infection prevention space for many years. My background was primarily in water. And in the water space, we would occasionally use UV-C as a disinfection modality to disinfect water distribution systems. And that was a very effective technology. And there came a point where there was the emergence of some of the multi-drug resistant pathogens. And I sat down with some of my friends in the infectious disease world and said, hey, what do you think if we tried this UV thing to try to disinfect patient rooms? And I'll never forget it. I'm talking with some of the ID docs, and they said, Gunner, if you guys can do that, that would be a real game changer. And when I founded the company 10 plus years ago, the organism that was of greatest concern was MRSA, so methicillin-resistant staph. And so, hey, I thought it was a pretty safe bet. There was a couple of other, players that were dabbling in the space. Some of what they were doing just from a engineering perspective, a user experience perspective, and a physics perspective just really didn't make a lot of sense. So we had developed this multiple robotic technology. We launched it and performed. We were very fortunate, just performed very, very well. And, now 10 years later, we're on to pretty great things.
Well, I'll say UV-C, if anybody checks out your website, they'll also learn, has a pretty broad application throughout healthcare organizations and outside as well. But as we're talking today, specifically in surgical services, I'm excited to talk about the application of that. And we're going to be talking about some myths that exist around UV-C as well. Before we do that, though, you were talking about, really how Surfacide came to be, but I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the company.
Yeah, so again, I had founded the company, a little over 10 years ago, and we've grown significantly. So, as a result of, a lot of hard work from everybody on our team, we really dedicated ourselves to a lot of the evidence-based data, generating that data to figure out what works really well, but equally important, what doesn't work so well when using UV-C as a modality. And then came the pandemic, and I think we all saw what happened as a result of UV-C and the work that UV-C did during the pandemic. I mean, it's been an interesting ride as a result of the pandemic. There's been a significant number of new market entrants that are coming into the space. But one of the real challenges is that as a result of all these new market entrants, it really has just become a free-for-all. Some of them are trying to ride on Surfacide's coattails. They are not rooted in science. They're making these grandiose claims. And I think that when we work with OR directors and we're able to explain, some of the simple principles that are involved with using UV-C as a modality, those in the OR space kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, now this makes a lot of sense. And now what we're hearing from others that, just were founded or started less than a year ago that are making these big claims, a lot of that just doesn't make sense. So, I think the cool thing about Surfacide is, again, we're rooted in science. We've been around for 10 years. We are basing our technology on evidence-based medicine or evidence-based data. We're a company that believes that if you trust the data, good things will come.
Yeah, we're big believers in the data too, and it is evidence-based medicine. So you should have data behind it. And one of the other things that stood out to me as you were telling me about the company is that you're American made. And is that, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about where you're located, but is that also true of a lot of these sort of new market entrants as it's becoming more and more saturated?
Yeah, so that's actually a kind of an interesting point, Justin. When I founded the company, I just felt it really important to, support American industry. So our corporate headquarters are in Waukesha, Wisconsin. So that's a suburb right outside of Milwaukee. For those of you that don't know where Waukesha is, which is probably the majority of you, that's also the headquarters for GE Healthcare. So it's a great, great region for really solid med tech and access to really, really great talent. Now, really, as a result of the pandemic, there's been a pretty significant shift. And when we look at the new market entrants, the primary region that most of these companies are originating from are Asia. And so with the Asian influx, there's probably less commitment or dedication to just doing things the right way. And that's just not how we're wired. However, by basing our company in America and working with, back 10 years ago, some of the mom and pop tool and die shops during the pandemic, we were not really impacted by all the supply chain issues that, we still continually hear about today. I mean, we still find stresses by just, we can't find chips for cars or chips for cell phones or computers. I mean, this is really kind of a blind spot in American industry. So I think that when Surfacide committed itself to being American made, we benefited significantly by being able to provide our healthcare partners throughout the country, our technology and not relying upon, okay, is it going to make it over on the cargo carrier, 6 months from now as it's, entering in from China.
So another thing that we mentioned right off the top was UV-C. And I'd like for you to maybe define this a little bit so everybody can anchor on it. But also, is everybody that's coming into the market using that technology, or are there other technologies out there that are in play?
Yeah, so let me describe just really the UV-C platform and then some of the other modalities that are being incorporated into the overall UV spectrum. So, gosh, I don't want to bore your listeners with the gory details and get too far into the weeds. But UV-C is in the invisible light spectrum. And what's kind of cool about this, or what's really interesting about UV-C, is that while UV-C is actually produced by the sun, the ozone layer filters that out. And why that's important is that all the bacteria and virus, on the Earth's surface have really never encountered UVC. So when we use UVC as a disinfection modality, these organisms over millions and millions of years have never had the opportunity to evolve. This is the first time that it's seen this energy at 254 nanometers in the invisible light spectrum. Now, there's also this conversation about the far spectrum and some other spectrums, which it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of chatter about that. There's some tremendous marketing campaigns that are out there right now about, well, let's bring in far UV. Let's incorporate that into the ceilings. We know that specifically related to SARS-CoV-2, it could reduce that. Well, again, as we just said a minute ago, trust the data. I think the data, it's in its infancy, and we really need to do significantly more work, not only to demonstrate the efficacy of some of these spectrums of energy outside of what Surfacide delivers at 254, but just the overall safety element. It's one thing to see it on a nice glossy brochure saying, well, it is safe, but it's another to go through the entire process to demonstrate that. And coincidentally, I was just at the IUVA meeting, which was in Cincinnati a few weeks ago, and that was really a very important talking point. This was an audience made up of the world's leading physicists that are using UVC or studying UVC or UV in general. And there were a lot of questions discussing the overall safe use. So I think that what I would encourage the audience is that it's about safety. We know that UVC is effective, and we know that some of these other spectrums may be effective. The one thing that I can tell your audience is that with Surfacide, because we've gone through the diligence of working with ETL, which is Intertech, or some will go through UL, that's really those safety approvals. When you use our technology, it's safe. When you're using alternative technology, I think that it's really important to take a step back to see where that all falls onto the overall spectrum of safety. And are there data available to indicate that it is safe for use, especially safe for use in the presence of humans?
So the company's been around for over 10 years, and something interesting that happened around the same time that the company was founded was a change in the reimbursement model. And I'm not sure that everybody listening is familiar with HCAHPS scores, and I'm not going to define that acronym, but if you want to research it online, it's HCAHPS. And it's tied to basically patient satisfaction and patient experience. And something else that you told me about the company was that you really have a focus on increasing those scores, which also helps with reimbursement. Can you tell us about that before we dive into the myths?
Sure. Yeah, so HCAHPS are very broad, as far as kind of how a hospital is scored, in the eyes of Medicare and Medicaid. Now, one particular element of HCAHPS is the overall patient experience. And as a result of the Affordable Care Act, to your point, Justin, hospitals are reimbursed based upon the overall hospital experience. And so one of the interesting outcomes through the use of our technology is that when our technology rolls into a hospital, we spent a significant amount of time, money, and resources in developing the overall industrial design. So that's kind of the overall look and feel and the overall user experience. And so what differentiates Surfacide from alternative modalities is when we bring our technology in, it literally looks like a Ferrari rolling through the hallway. Well, the reason I share that is that when the patient, or equally important, when the patient's family members see that robot, that Ferrari rolling through the hospital, hallways or in the patient room, it begs a question like, wow, what is that? And I'll never forget, I was in one major academic institution. We were rolling this in, and sure enough, this happened to be a physician. And they're like, what in the world is that, Gunner? And so we kind of went through the whole story. And he's like, well, I thought it was the flux capacitor from Back to the Future. So it was kind of like this super futuristic kind of cool looking technology. However, where that ties in really importantly to the HCAHPS scores is that when the patient or when the patient's family member is completing that score, one of the scores on that is the overall cleanliness score. And we know that cleanliness score on HCAHPS is, according to Press-Ganey, so this isn't me, this is Press-Ganey, where they're able to say that that's one of the most important questions on the survey. And so when the patient sees like, wow, I'm in an organization that's committed to better environments, committed to, bioburden removal. And then they see this really cool futuristic technology that translates to higher scores. So it was really kind of interesting. We partnered with one of our really good partners and we evaluated the overall scores and we did a multi-center study. And it was really kind of amazing, Justin. Not only were we able to demonstrate the reduction in bioburden, but we saw dramatic improvement in the patient experience scores. Literally, we are batting 1,000. So as a result of that, we're rolling out these new programs and we're seeing that not only on the patient units, but we're seeing operating rooms. So the surgeons will communicate it to their patients, in pre-op, like, hey, this is something that the institution is doing. Or we're also beginning to see it in ASCs, where these ASCs, obviously that's the wave of the future, when it comes to surgical procedures, to be able to communicate to their patients, their customers, this is our commitment to ensuring that we're providing you an environment with a reduction in bacteria, virus, spore. This is kind of what we're doing, and it translates to higher scores. So kind of everybody wins. The patient wins, the organization wins, and then Surfacide wins.
Okay, so all of that is amazing information. And everybody listening probably has things that they've heard before about UV-C that maybe don't add up to the things that they're hearing. And so I want to dive into those myths that maybe people have heard so we can really break them down and dispel them. So the first one has to do with this idea of whole room disinfection. So what are some of the misconceptions around whole room disinfection?
Yes, that's a really interesting question, Melanie. And when I'm meeting with value committees or infection prevention committees, this is a relatively simple technology. I think that it's really easy to overcomplicate things, but at the end of the day, all we are doing is delivering energy in the spectrum that we were just discussing at 254 nanometers. But there are three simple elements that need to be contemplated when using UV-C as a disinfection modality. First, it's shadows. Second, it's distance. And third, it's labor and time. And so to address your question, Melanie, when you talk about whole room disinfection, I think one of the things that we lean back and we just scratch our heads is that when we see a very small single, a robotic platform that's only using one robot, and they come in and they say, ta-da, we're going to disinfect this entire operating room. And, I think what committees need to do is just to remind themselves that there is not a magic fairy that comes in with magic fairy dust,
right,
to deliver UV-C into all these areas, right? I mean, let's face it, if you've only got one robot, just kind of if everybody closes their eyes. So for those of you that are listening to the cast and you're driving, don't close your eyes. But if you could just kind of envision, what does this really look like? You need to understand that if you're only using one robot, the vast majority, arguably 2/3 of that room, is in a shadowed region. Now, if you contemplate what Surfacide does by bringing in 3 robots during a single disinfection cycle, and we create a triangular configuration around the surgical table, the vast majority of all those surfaces, all of those fomites, are within the direct line of sight. So we check that box. Now, the other thing that we do, though, is that think now, because we have 3 robots, how close in proximity we are to all of those surfaces. And by being close in proximity, that allows us to deliver the effective dose that is necessary to reduce the bioburden that is left after that terminal discharge cleaning. And so that's also a really important element. And then finally, it's kind of that time element and that labor element. We have this set and a go opportunity where we bring in our robots, we create that triangular configuration. We have a really nice Apple-like experience on our tablet computer. So we go through this interface, we hit go, and now everything is being done automatically. So that is significantly different than others that don't bring in multiple robots, where they're bringing in this single robot and they're making these grandiose claims that, we're demonstrating whole room disinfection. That just is not happening. It's not whole room disinfection for a single robot. It may be third of the room disinfection. And for all of the surgeons that are listening, or all of the, directors of the OR that are listening, we all know that ORs present very complex environments, and we want to bring in technology that is capturing all of these really important surfaces and fomites to provide the best environment possible.
Okay. So the
does
circulator
that answer your question? I know that I was kind of...
It does, but it actually brought up another one before we go into the second myth, because the circulator in me hears 1 robot versus 3 robots. What does that look like for turnover time? Are we talking end of the day cleaning? When are we using these robots to disinfect our rooms? And if we're bringing in 3 of them, is there extra staff needed? How does that work?
Our technology is generally used, but there's going to be a caveat here. It's generally used at the end of the day. And so it's adjunctive to terminal cleaning. So let's just focus on the operating room. So the environmental services team, which I'll give a big shout out to the EVS teams because they just do tremendous work, especially during the pandemic. You know, you look at what these individuals did for not only our patients, but really for our country as a whole to make sure that these healthcare facilities stayed open. I mean, just, you know, gold stars in heaven for all of them. Mm-hmm. So they go into these OR environments and they clean that room. However, we know that the data show that upwards of 50% of these surfaces remain colonized even after the terminal discharge cleaning process. Now comes in Surfacide, and we create this triangular configuration, and we go through that entire process that I had just described. So it really, in an operating room environment, it's arguably time neutral. And the reason I say it's time neutral is maybe that's a little bit of a stretch. It's time neutral. Maybe we're adding 3 to 5 minutes onto the overall time, but we're able to provide this leapfrog event. So the EVS team goes in, they complete the terminal discharge clean, they roll in our technology. Now they hit go. Now they go and begin cleaning the other OR, which generally they're provided about 60 minutes to clean that room. Our disinfection technology is operating generally in less than 30 minutes. So you can see that it's time neutral. And so from room 1 now to room 2, they've just have completed room 2. Now they bring our technology in room 2, and now they go to 3, and then 4 and 5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the reason that I said, and here's the caveat, with Surfacide, because of the way that we designed our technology, we know that there's a direct correlation between dose delivery and the overall log reduction. So the amount of reduction of the organism. So Surfacide is able to achieve, by our indications for use, a 6 log reduction. So that's 99.9999% reduction. If you look at the other modalities, they're typically about 99%. So significantly less. But the way our technology was developed was we wanted to harness that energy and drive that energy onto all of those surfaces. However, one of the interesting outcomes of how we're doing that is now we can change the angularity. So here's where I'm going, Melanie, with the caveat. We are seeing some institutions that will use our technology on an in-between case basis. And the way that we're able to do that is we can change where the energy is being delivered. So instead of disinfecting the entire OR, we can change the delivery of the energy only around the surgical table. So let me kind of put it into a really simple analogy. Instead of watering the entire lawn, we're simply going to water the flower garden. And we are the only modality that can do that. And what's really kind of fascinating is that we can get in and out. We refer to that as a scrub. We can get in and out of that room in less than 10 minutes. So yes, that does add time, Melanie, into the overall caseload. However, when we sit down with the surgeons, and a lot of times it's the orthopedic surgeons, which we know that especially in these bundled payments, these orthopedic surgeons, they twitch when they start hearing about surgical site infections, because these orthopedic infections, I mean, let's face it, you've got a clinical background, Melanie. I mean, now suddenly you've got a deep wound bacteremia and it's a mess. Everybody loses. The biggest loser is the patient, because the patient doesn't sign up for that infection. But the institution loses because now the institution or the surgeons or that ASC owns all of the costs associated with fixing that problem. And so when we can sit down with an orthopedic surgeon to say, yeah, we know, we appreciate that it's click, click, click when it comes to your cases. But if you just take an extra 10 minutes or actually a little less than 10 minutes, that we can demonstrate a 6 log reduction around that surgical table and we can move that needle, that oftentimes will at a minimum get their attention. It is at a minimum something for them to consider. So it's one of those things that as we're growing within the operating space, more and more people are taking a very, very hard look at the evidence-based data surrounding how they can deploy our technology and how we can move the needle. And then furthermore, Justin, I'll tie this back to the overall patient experience, right? Because if we are at a point where we're reducing the bioburden, and as a result of reducing the bioburden, that may change the overall patient outcome. Well, that's also fantastic because now that's going to improve the overall patient experience. So all of these things are intertwined. And so everybody's got a little bit of skin in the game here.
That's a very helpful explanation. Thank you for taking the time to explain that to me. But also, I think, too, from my experience in orthopedics, a lot of orthopedic surgeons are bouncing between rooms. So, and then if you do a patient who's heavily infected and you have to bring another patient back into that room, that extra peace of mind that we got rid of whatever bugs were in that room before we brought somebody else back in, that's a huge peace of mind, not only for the next patient, but also for the staff in the room and for the surgeon, knowing that they've got a clean room to operate in again if we have to come back in that room. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah. And you are probably aware of the data. You know, it's really stunning that if the previous patient or occupant presented with an infection, so for example, Melanie, if I were in the room and I had presented with XYZ infection, and you then occupy that room after I was in that room, you stand a 583% greater likelihood of acquiring the exact infection that I had. So almost a 6-fold increase.
Wow.
I should look. I can't recall. I think, and we could do a little bit of fact checking here. I believe that those data just came out of Yale. But your audience could kind of take a step back, or they could certainly visit our website, or they could certainly reach out to me and I could validate that. But really just kind of a stunning statistic. And obviously anybody that's listening to this cast, they don't want to see that happen. And so whatever tools that we could provide in the toolkit to reduce that, in no way, shape, or form am I suggesting that we are going to eliminate that. But wow, if we can move the needle just a little bit, think of what we could do for healthcare as a whole.
Absolutely. You are absolutely right. That's an incredible statistic. So I want to move on to our next myth because I really want to break down these myths and make sure that we can really explain the truth of what's going on with UV-C disinfection and Surfacide. But this other myth that says that half the time does half the job. Explain that to me and break it down for me.
Yeah, just it's a great marketing. I guess it's a great marketing phrase, but it defies logic. You know, we see some, we literally see some in the UV-C space that will say, go ahead and bring our technology in and we will disinfect this entire operating room in 2 minutes. Or there's another out there that says we can disinfect this entire room in 7 minutes. Again, it is a pretty simple formula. Time plus distance equals the total delivered energy. And that total delivered energy correlates with overall log reduction. If somebody comes in and says that they could disinfect an entire space in half of the amount of time or in these 2-minute disinfection cycle times, I think that you should ask some very, very tough questions and ask for the data in the peer review form that shows that. And I think that you will quickly dispel that myth and be able to say or call it out that this is just something that's on that marketing slick and it is not something that's rooted in evidence-based medicine.
Interesting. So what about mercury lamps? Are we using mercury lamps when we're using UV-C disinfection?
Yeah, so there's 2 ways to generate UV-C energy. One is through continuous disinfection, which uses a very, very small amount of mercury. And then there's another modality that uses a pulsed xenon gas. So let me just talk a little bit about mercury. So the Surfacide technology uses mercury. For clarity, the amount of mercury that's contained in any one of our lamps literally can sit on the head of a pin. So it's a microscopic amount. Another great analogy is that if for those that are listening and if they're in their office right now, if they look up in their ceiling and they see those linear fluorescent lamps, there's more mercury in that linear fluorescent lamp than is what is contained in the Surfacide technology. So it's an insignificant amount of mercury. But essentially what we do is that we excite the mercury. That then allows us to generate the 254 light spectrum, which then delivers the dose of energy onto those surfaces. The other modality uses pulse xenon. Pulse xenon will generate a broader spectrum of energy. However, the fatal flaw in that is that we know that the data show that you want to be in the sweet spot. We want to deliver energy at 254 nanometers. Anything outside of 254 nanometers is simply noise. And so when you hear broad spectrum, the only area in which pulse xenon is able to deliver energy at 254 is about 11%. So during their disinfection cycle, only 11% of the energy that is being delivered is effective. And that is also supported in the peer review form. Dr. Kurt Donsky did a study in one journal article several years ago. And if you hear some of the physicians, they'll just reference that, the pulse xenon is highly ineffective at effectively reducing bioburden within these rooms. And that's primarily because the vast majority of all their energy is kind of in these bandwidths of noise outside of the sweet spot of 254 nanometers.
All right. So all of this is incredibly interesting and it makes a lot of sense. Having 3 robots, that makes perfect sense to me. But how come everybody else doesn't use 3 robots? How come some people are only using 1?
So that's also a really good point, Melanie. Yeah, so when I started the company 10 years ago, and, I was in a very advantageous position because there were some other UV companies that were using the single robotic platform. I leaned back and a lot of it just honestly didn't make sense, Melanie. I kind of said, well, how are they dealing with the shadowed regions? Because I could literally see during some demonstrations that the vast majority of the space was in a shadowed region. And then, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I also appreciated the inverse square law that tells us that, the energy is reduced to 1/4 of the power, not 1/2. A lot of that stuff added up. So as I began to explore what we could do, that's really where Surfacide's intellectual property came into the mix. So I don't know how many patents have been awarded to Surfacide, not only in the United States, but internationally, that provides Surfacide the opportunity to provide this multiple robotic platform. Now, there's some other elements that are a part of it. It's a real engineering feat. Part of this engineering feat is that we now need to ensure that, we're able to work on a 15 amp or a 20 amp circuit in order to do that. And then this ties back to why we had developed that parabolic concentrator, which was that scrub feature on that in-between case. That's how we are able to deliver that really high dose of energy in a very short amount of time that allows us to achieve the 6-log reduction of all these organisms, which is applicable to our indications for use. So is that helpful in describing why others aren't able to just kind of willy-nilly? So bottom line is that if one of the other UV companies were to bring in more than one of their robots and they plugged it in, they are going to be popping fuses. Now, occasionally, we'll see others try to bring in more than one, and they'll try to operate on emergency power, and that doesn't fly with the facility management team because you're not allowed to use that emergency power. So there's a lot of factors. But with Surfacide, we really figured out the engineering aspects so we could bring in the multiple robots to get everybody across the goal line.
That's really cool. And that kind of feeds into our last myth here, but really, it just says that, all UV systems really are created equal. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So the short answer is no, they are not. Now, at the absolute root level, I guess the small amount of truth in that is that we are delivering energy at 254 nanometers. And I described that a little bit earlier. So when an infection prevention committee appreciates that we are all delivering energy at 254, then, and gosh, I sound like a broken record here, you guys, that's when a committee or a value committee needs to step back and say, well, gosh, if everybody's delivering energy at 254, how are we addressing the shadows, the distance, and the labor? Because that is how you get across the goal line to ensure that we're delivering energy to all of these surfaces and to achieve what the indication for use is.
Gunner, I've heard so much about that shadow effect, and that was really the biggest objection when I had seen similar technologies coming to the market. And a lot of the hospital folks that I was talking to were just saying, oh yeah, but the shadow effect. And I think that's really important, how you've tackled that challenge in such an effective way. There's also something else that I know we're getting close to the end here, and I want to point out some white papers and some reports that are going to be made available to the audience. But there's this laser mapping room feature. And I don't know how that may or may not tie into the shadows, but I'm assuming that's some pretty extensive technology that helps make sure, again, that you're hitting every area in the room.
Yeah, so that's also a really kind of very important feature to, the Surfacide technology. And to just pick up one thing, Justin, that you were saying, you're correct. The shadows, and I think that, some of the legacy technology that relies heavily, if not 100% on shadows, we now know UV-C reflects at about a 2 to a 3, and maybe sometimes as high as a 5% reflectivity rate. So, if you're relying on shadows, it just doesn't get you there. But the other really important element is one thing that I had mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, is it's a pretty simple formula. Time plus distance equals total delivered energy. Now, when we were developing the technology, we realized how stressed the environmental services teams are. And I just did not feel that we should rely on the environmental services team associates to make this really, really important clinical decision as far as how much time do I need to run the disinfection modality? Or furthermore, just these random arbitrary things. And this goes back to Melanie's, like, the whole room disinfection. Well, just run the technology for this arbitrary amount of time of 2 minutes or 5 minutes. All of that is just not evidence-based. The way that we overcome that, Justin, is we use this laser mapping technology. And so again, time plus distance equals total delivered energy. We map the room. And so what we're basically doing is we are telling our emitters, our robots, how large the room is that we're disinfecting. Furthermore, with part of our laser mapping technology, we are telling our robots where they are in proximity to specific fomites in the room and where they are in proximity to the other 2 robots in the room. So you're right. This is pretty complex. We're getting into some pretty, complex, mathematical equations. But the beautiful thing is all of that is housed natively on the tablet. So we're not asking anybody to do anything. They simply hit go. We laser map the room. It drops into the algorithm. They exit the space, and then it automatically calculates the amount of time that is necessary to deliver the effective dose. So that is where Surfacide is significantly more sophisticated. But what I love about it, Justin, is it's this very Apple-like experience. We wanted to create a user experience that's incredibly simple. Most of our environmental services team members are able to operate or learn how to operate the equipment in about 15 or 20 minutes. Now, I have an amazing account management team or implementation team. So when we roll in a technology, we're typically about 2 days on site, just working through some of the kinks and working through some of the pain points. But at the absolute root level, these environmental services team members in less than 20 minutes know how to operate our technology. And it's for that reason that when it's rolled out into the institution, its ease of use ensures that it is actually being used. It's not like so many of these other legacy technologies that end up in a closet. This is something that the environmental services teams embrace, the clinical teams embrace, the C-suites embrace it, because we're hitting on all cylinders. And, if you look back at some of the recent reports, like I'm not sure that, you have awareness, Justin, of this CLASS report. So CLASS, which is doing a lot of the work in the software space, is really kind of this independent third-party objective report. But it was a proud day for Surfacide, and it may be self-promoting, so forgive me. But it was really cool. 100% of the Surfacide users in their independent responses to CLASS said 100% said they would purchase from Surfacide again. And I think that that's just a testament to the Surfacide team. I think it's a testament to the Surfacide technology and to our overall commitment and partnership to collaborate with healthcare institutions to do the right thing. And it's for that reason that we're implemented now in well over 500 hospitals here in the United States. And we have a worldwide presence because we're the organization that is moving the needle to benefit hospitals and patients throughout the world.
Yeah, I love that. Just plug and play, easy to use. But the biggest reason is that it's sustainable. This is something that, once you put it into place, the way that you've made it easy to use, it's not like all of a sudden there's going to be all this user error that's going to prevent it from having that same impact over and over. So you're able to replicate what you were able to achieve in the lab setting out there in the real world. I think that's critically important when healthcare organizations are going to be spending money on a technology that they need it to do a certain thing. And you mentioned the class report, but you also have the Press-Ganey white paper, and then you've got a study from the University of Iowa around SARS-CoV-2, and all of that is available on your website.
I would love to just take 20 seconds and then talk about how we create this culture of continued improvement. All of the data are captured. It's sent up into the cloud. So that allows us to see what's working really well, but equally important, what's not working. Physicians love that. That's just the way they're wired. They want to see where there are some of those blind spots. And by recognizing those blind spots, now it provides us an opportunity to coach up. And by coaching up, now we're just continuously improving. And so it just, when we're working with these institutions, where we may be at month 3 is significantly different from where we are at month 6 or month 9 because of how we are driving this constant improvement through the use of our technology.
Yeah, I think it really is super important. I like the fact that you're storing that data too for record keeping. That's just another one of those ease of use scenarios. And as I mentioned, class report, Press-Ganey white paper, University of Iowa study around SARS-CoV-2. All of that is going to be bonus content on the smartphone app on iPhone and Android. So make sure you download that. You can also visit their website, surfacide.com. That's surfacide.com. You can send an email to info@surfacide.com. You can also follow them on social media. That's LinkedIn primarily, but also Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Gunner, you've done an amazing job, not only building this company and the technology, but describing it today and the importance of having something that's truly sustainable and has an impact. I love the technology and the way you've addressed the shadows. This was a great conversation today. Anything you want to add related to like promos or the work that you have done with group purchasing organizations?
Oh, well, yeah. So first, Justin and Melanie, it was great to be with the both of you today. I really appreciate your time and interest. We are providing some end of year promotions. So we are on some of the GPO contracts. I would encourage your audience to visit the website, ask for some additional information. And, we would certainly be able to provide you with more information regarding some of the incentives, as we're closing out the end of the year, which in and of itself is amazing, isn't it, Justin? I mean, Christmas is just a little over a month away. So there's a lot going on as we're closing out the year.
It absolutely did go quick. I'd say the last 3 years have gone quite quickly. And this has been, a really interesting time. I think you have an exciting solution to address some challenges that have really gone up everybody's radar over the last several years. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Oh, you're welcome. And again, thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Justin, for the time and interest. And for those that are listening, I'm pretty passionate about what we do. I know that we've got, an amazing technology and we have an even better team. And, I'm looking forward to, what 2023 and beyond brings, as we're partnering with more and more healthcare organizations throughout the world.
All right, everybody. That was Gunner Lyslo, founder and CEO of Surfacide. And honestly, Melanie, I had seen a lot of UV disinfection systems coming into the market really over the last 10 years or so. but it was always about the shadow effect. And I just not sure that people felt confident in the repeatability of the results, especially when it came to training. And even Gunner described it, just one of these units sitting in the closet and not getting put to use. I love the way that they've automated it where it's really just plug and play. They've addressed the shadow effect. And really by using their patented triple emitter robotic solution, they've really handled a lot of those scenarios and made it applicable. I know you asked some really great questions as we were going through the myths section, specifically around what's going to be the impact, on the day-to-day in the operating.
Yeah. I mean, that's where my brain immediately went to. And well, first, my mind was blown when we talk about how much more likely a patient is to get an infection, the same infection, following in a case where the patient was already infected. And that percentage was mind blowing to me, and something we all kind of know in our gut anyway, but now to actually have a percentage for that is kind of just incredible. But then also I remember when I was managing an OR in Fort Worth, our infection preventionist was actually trialing a low level disinfection system. And this was new technology back then. This was roughly, 10 years ago. But I heard a lot of these same statements and a lot of these myths that we looked at today, things that I was told while we were looking at this equipment. So it was really helpful to break down those statements and those thoughts and really find out what the truth is about low level disinfection and how their system really is helping us make sure that we can fight that enemy that we can't see and that we have a clean environment.
Yeah, wide range of applicability in surgical services, but as Gunner mentioned, throughout the healthcare organization. So, if you're working in sterile processing or the operating room, you've certainly heard about this technology and you've seen it, but it's really used in lots of areas, even ones that aren't in the surgical setting. So they've done a nice job with this product and developing it. I enjoyed the conversation with Gunner. I do want to remind everybody that they can download bonus content from our smartphone app. That's going to include the class report, the Press Ganey white paper, and then the study in the Journal of Clinical Anesthesia from the University of Iowa. So make sure you download that. Follow them on LinkedIn. You can also find them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The website is surfacide.com, surfacide.com, and you can send them an email, info@surfacide.com. And that's going to do it for this episode. But I did mention the smartphone app, and we really want you to download it. So make sure you check that out on iPhone and Android. It's the best way to listen to the First Case podcast. And we love feedback. Melanie and I get emails all the time with recommendations for guests or topics or even themes for the seasons as we are doing now. So we do want to hear from you. Just send an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. Thank you for listening to this Vendor Spotlight on First Case.